Om Swastiastu. I'm from Group 3, Teaching Listening, and with my material Listening in Language Learning by David Nunan. There are two theories that I will discuss from David Nunan. There are bottom-up processing and top-down processing. Bottom-up processing refers to using the incoming input as the basis of understanding the message. Comprehension begins with the received data that is analyzed and successive level of the organization, sounds, word, clause, sentence, text until meaning is delivered. The listener lexical and grammatical competence in language provides the basis for bottom-up processing. The input is scanned for familiar words and grammatical knowledge is used to work out the relationship between elements of sentence. From Clark, 1977, summarized this view of listening in the following way. First, listeners take in raw speech and hold a phonological representation of it in working memory. Second, they immediately attempt to organize the phonological representation into constituents, identifying their content and function. Third, they identify each constituent and then construct an underlying proposition, building continually into a hierarchical representation of proposition. Fourth, once they have identified the proposition for a constituent, they retain them in working memory and at some point purge memory of the phonological representation. In doing this, they forget the exact wording and retain the meaning. Teaching bottom-up processing. Learners need a large vocabulary and good working knowledge of sentence structure to process text bottom-up. Exercise that develop bottom-up processing help the learner to do such thing as the following. Retain input while it is being processed, recognize word and clause division, recognize keywords, recognize key transition in discourse, recognize grammatical relationship between key element in sentence, and last use stress and intonation to identify word and sentence function. Many traditional classroom listening activities focus primarily on bottom-up processing, with exercise such as dictation, close listening, the use of multiple choice, question after a text, and similar activities that require close and detailed recognition and processing of the input. They assume that everything the listener needs to understand is contained in the input. In the classroom, example of the kinds of tasks that develop bottom-up listening skill require listener to do the following kinds of things. First, identify the reference of pronouns in a utterance. Recognize the time reference of an utterance. Distinguish between positive and negative statement. Recognize the order in which words occur in an utterance. Identify sequence markers. Identify keywords that occur in a spoken text. Identify which modal verbs occur in a spoken text. Theory number 2. Top-down processing. Top-down processing, on the other hand, refers to the use of background knowledge in understanding the meaning of a message, whereas bottom-up processing goes from language to meaning. Top-down processing goes from meaning to language. The background knowledge required for top-down processing may be previous knowledge about the topic of discourse, situational or contextual knowledge, or knowledge in the form of schemate or scripts planned about the overall structure of event and the relationship between them. Teaching top-down processing. Exercise that require top-down processing develop the learner's ability to do the following. The first, use keyword to construct the schema of a discourse, and then at the next, infer the setting for a text, infer the role of the participant and their goals, infer cause of effect, infer unstate details of the situation, and the last, anticipate question related to the topic or situation. The following activities develop top-down listening skills. The first, students generate a set of questions they expect to hear about topic, then listen to see if they are answered. Students generate a list of things they already know about a topic and things they would like to learn more about, then listen and compare. Third, students rate one speaker's part in a conversation, predict the other speaker parts, then listen and compare. The fourth, student rate a list of key points to be covered in a talk, then listen to see which one are mentioned. Fifth, student listen to part of the story, complete the story ends, and then listen and compare ending. The last, student read news headlines, guess what happened, then listen to the full news in item and compare. And the conclusion, in real world listening, both bottom up and top down processing generally occur together. The extent to which one or the other dominates depends on the listener's familiarity with the topic and content of text, the density of information in text, the text type, and the listener purpose in listening. For example, an experienced cook might listen to a radio chef describing a recipe for cooking chicken to compare the chef's recipe with her own. She has a precise schema to apply to the text and listen to register similarities and difference. She makes more use of top-down processing. However, a novice cook listening to the same program might listen with much greater attention, trying to identify each step in order to write down the recipe. Here, far more bottom-up processing is needed. A typical lesson in current teaching materials involves a three-part sequence consisting of the pre-listening, while listening, and post-listening, and content activities that link bottom-up and top-down listening. The pre-listening phase prepares students for both top-down and bottom-up processing through activities involving activating prior knowledge, making prediction, and reviewing key vocabulary. The while listening phase focus on comprehension through exercise that require selective listening, guest listening, sequencing, etc. The post-listening phase typically involve a response to comprehension and may require students to give opinions about a topic. However, it can also include a bottom-up focus if the teacher and the listener uh, examine the text or part of the text in detail, focusing on section that student could not follow. This may involve a microanalysis of section of the text to enable student to recognize such features as blank, reduced word, ellipses, and other features of spoken discourse that they were unable to process or recognize. Okay, that's all about my presentation. Thank you.
Swastiastu. Hello, my name is Rico Wirawan. So today here I will explain about the teaching listening, which is the strategy of teaching listening by W.E.L.D. Teaching listening, the changing face of listening itself. So there are three activities in teaching listening. So there are pre-listening activities, listening activities, and the last one is the post-listening activities. The pre-listening activities is the pre-teaching of all important new vocabulary in the passage. So the second one is listening activities, extensive listening followed by general questions establishing context, intensive listening followed by detail of comprehension questions, and the last one is the post listening activities. So I will decipher all of them, explain each one of them briefly. So I will just give you an overview of these three. So for the pre-listening activities in Indonesia, it's more like a aktivitas listening, aktivitas teaching listening yang dilakukan sebelum melakukan listening itu. Seperti jika kita melakukan tes listening, ada yang namanya pre-listening activities. Pre-listening activities itu adalah hal yang dilakukan yang masih berhubungan tentang aktivitas listening, tapi sebelum. Seperti itu. Nanti untuk further information, I will explain in the pre-listening part. So for the listening activities, itu adalah the middle atau or also known as kegiatan listening. Jadi the main pointnya ada di sana gitu. Terus untuk di post listening activities adalah kegiatan pasca mendengarkan. Jadi kegiatan pasca mendengarkan itu lebih seperti listen and repeat the language, or we can check the grammar. So more like an analysis or observe the grammar. Maybe if we have a test in the filling the gaps and of some conversation maybe or song maybe. So that's the simple question, a simple example of it. So that's the overview of pre-listening activities, listening activities, and the post-listening activities. In pre-listening activities, I mentioned about the pre-teaching of all important new vocabulary in the passage. It means, so if the teacher want to have a test of documentary of law, maksudnya documentary dari hukum-hukum gitu, atau hukum atau kriminal seperti itu, dia harus menyajikan sebuah vocabulary yang masih berkaitan dengan hal itu, dan setelah itu memberikan sebuah tes yang masih berhubungan tentang hal itu. Jadi contohnya misal judicial and court report and so forth, dan banyak lagi. Jadi itu yang dilakukan seorang guru kepada siswanya di pre-listening activities. So it has any connection with the listening activities. Jadi apa yang sudah mereka dapatkan di sana akan dipraktikkan di listening activities, will be practiced in listening activities. Jadi guru tuh bakal menyajikan sebuah conversation or maybe song. I think it more like conversation about the police and the victim and maybe the burglar, maybe, I don't know. So something like that. So it has any connection with the documentary of law or the vocabulary it's around criminal. So it has any connection about the pre-listening activities and the listening activities. Why I mention about this, because I mentioned about the pre-teaching of all important new vocabulary in the passage. That's why I mentioned all of this explanation. And for the listening activities, for the extensive listening followed by general question establishing context. Maksudnya di sini itu adalah listening yang jauh gitu, maksudnya yang ekstensif, yang lebih jauh gitu, maksudnya yang diikuti oleh question yang secara umum aja. Maksudnya contohnya kayak orang yang berkomunikasi tentang apa, maksudnya berkomunikasi, have a communication or having a discussion about price of a hotel, or maybe a land, maybe a laptop, or or any other electronic, and then followed by general question. Maybe the teacher will provide about the question, what is the price, with who the speaker talking with, and then any other question, and it's still general, not specific. And for intensive listening followed by detailed comprehension the question, it means like having discussion but intensively listening. Jadi benar-benar intensif aja dia sama orang yang satu itu aja gitu. Terus questionnya itu lebih secara mendetail. What are they talking about? Pasti seperti itu contohnya. Jadi yang membedakan untuk di extensive and intensive listening itu adalah question atau question. Yang pertama itu di follow oleh general question, dan yang lagi satu itu di follow dengan specific question or lebih mendetail questionnya. Dan untuk yang extensive and intensive listening adalah extensive yang itu cuma sebagai istilah aja, yang membedakan itu cuma questionnya. Seperti itu, basic overview for all the overview. For the post listening activities that I already mentioned before, this only just like repetition and listen and repeat, always be like that. It's this example of this part is song test, fill the gaps. If we provide the student with the song that they must hear, and they must hear a specific vocabulary that they need to fill in the blank or gaps of each lyric, it must be have this activities like listen and repeat. For the other one, for analysis of the language in the text, or more like a grammar. So if you want to analysis of the language in text grammar in teaching listening, it should be not use song. It's more like conversation about two people or maybe more or what. So because conversation, it must be used grammar, how to make a good how to make a good conversation, well formed word, sentence, complex sentence. So that's from that we can analyze about the student can analyze about the grammar in teaching listening, in listening part. So I think that's all about the overview, the first overview of teaching listening by W.E.L.D. So it has any connection between the pre-listening, listening, and post-listening activities by W.E.L.D. that I already mentioned before. So maybe I will conclude all of them right now. For the English version, it's more like the teacher first must provide the student with the vocabulary that the teacher want to use in listening tests. So for example, if the teacher must provide the food vocabulary for the food test, maybe the listening is going around about the food, and then move to the post listening. Maybe they will listen again, repeat again, maybe they will analyze or observe about the grammar. It depends on the test. Is it the song test or discussion test? Okay, I think that's all. We move to the pre-listening activities. We'll continue about the pre-listening activities that already I shared the PowerPoint, so you can check the PowerPoint, you can see. So in pre-listening activities, I mentioned about the critical words and the pre-listening activities itself. So maybe I will just read it for you, and then I will start explain briefly so you can take the point so easily. So for the critical words, pre-teaching of vocabulary has now largely been discontinued. In real life, learners cannot expect a known word to be explained in advance. Instead, they have to learn to cope with the situation where part of what is heard will not be familiar. Granted, it may be necessary for the teacher to present 3 or 4 critical words at the beginning of the listening lesson. So it has any connection with the prior explanation that I mentioned before. So the first one is about the critical word in the pre-listening activities, about the pre-teaching of all important new vocabulary in the passage. So the teacher will provide the student the vocabulary that has any relation with the listening test that they will given to the students. For pre-teaching of vocabulary has now largely been discontinued. In real life, learner cannot expect unknown word to be explained in advance. Yes, student itu nggak bisa, misal kita dikasih tugas, for instance the student have been giving the test by the teacher, the student itu nggak bisa mengekspektasi the teacher itu bakal ngasih vocabulary-nya in advance sebelumnya. Itu dia nggak bisa mengekspektasi itu karena mereka itu harus belajar untuk menyesuaikan dengan apa yang mereka dengar. Vocabulary yang kosong itu yang harus kita isi, filling the gaps itu, kita tuh harus, the student tuh harus mendengarkan dan harus menebak apa itu. Jadi harus menyesuaikan dengan situasi. So that's why I say they have to learn to cope with the situation where part of what is heard will not be familiar. Pastinya di tempat itu, di bagian itu tuh mereka nggak familiar. Jadi bagaimana mereka tuh harus belajar untuk menyesuaikan situasi itu dengan mereka. Jadi mereka bisa mengisi the gaps-nya atau the blank part of the test. So it may be necessary for the teacher to present 3 or 4 critical words at the beginning of the listening lesson. Yes, the teacher must provide maybe at least 3 or 4 about the test. For example, if the theme about the seminar of linguistic, maybe the teacher provide the student with 3 or 4 maybe 3 word or vocabulary or big term, maybe for example like linguistic, computational literature, and then morphology. So that's the basic example of the pre-listening activities for the critical words. So the second one, for the pre-listening activities, I will read it first. Some kind of pre-listening activities is now usual, involving brainstorming vocabulary, reviewing areas of grammar, or discussing the topic of the listening text. This phase of the lesson usually lasts longer than it should. A long pre-listening session shorten the time available for listening. It can also be counterproductive. Extended discussion of the topic can result in much of the content of listening passage being anticipated. Revising language point in advance encourages learner to focus on examples of these particular items when listening. So the big point is, in pre-listening activities, it's now usual this day and consists with brainstorming of vocabulary. It means like latihan vocabulary pertama dulu, habis itu reviewing areas of grammar. Jadi mereview area of grammar. Jadi contohnya itu areanya itu teacher tuh bakal ngasih area grammar yang bakal digunakan dalam discussion ini. Tes ini adalah tentang past tense atau future tense, bisa present tense, seperti itu. Itu contohnya. Dan yang terakhir adalah discussing the topic of listening text. Jadi mereka tuh bakal mendiscuss dulu, having discussion about the text. But di antara semuanya itu, above all, a long pre-listening can be long that it should. Jadi sebenarnya untuk pre-listening activities itu nggak harus memakan banyak waktu sebenarnya. Jadi dia cuma makan sedikit waktu. Mungkin for example the teacher got 1 hour. Maybe for the pre-listening activities the teacher must take only 5 until 10 minutes. That would be enough to reviewing all of the vocabulary and the grammar, brainstorming their idea, their grammar, and then discussing the topic of the listening text. For the problem is the listening text, discussing about the listening text, it would be problem in this activities, because John Phil say a long pre-listening session shortened in time available for listening. It can also be counterproductive. Jadi itu tidak produktif gitu loh. Nggak produktif untuk pre-listening itu take too much time. Jadi cuma mengambil beberapa time aja. Jadi nggak for a short period of time, not long period of time. Seperti itu. Dan revising language points in advance encourages learner to focus on example of this particular item when listening. Ya, jadi dengan merevisi poin-poin dari bahasa itu, ya maksudnya merevisi poin-poin dari bahasa itu, maksudnya kayak lebih more like brainstorming vocabulary. Dia itu mengencourage student untuk fokus di example di this particular item of listening itself. So I think that's all for me for the pre-listening activities, for the critical words and the pre-listening activities. So the bottom line is critical words is the vocab that the student expect from the teacher, that the teacher will explain to them. And for the pre-listening activities, it consists with the brainstorming activities about the vocabulary and the reviewing areas of grammar and the discussing topic, and can be also have a obstacle. These activities can be longer than it should. Okay, I think that's all for me for the pre-listening activities. We move to the listening activities. We already come to the second session of the teaching listening, which is the listening part. So I will start explaining it to you, to all of you. I already provide this thing about the listening itself by 3 essential point in teaching listening. So the first one is the intensive or extensive distinction, and the second one is preset questions, and for the third one same as well, preset questions. So I will start explain briefly about that. So for the intensive or extensive distinction, it's more like it's quite complicated. It's hard for me to explain that, but I will just start explain one by one. Maybe the first ones I found from the some article or book say some university examination use intensive or extensive distinction by using audio, but they play the audio twice. And this situation also argue with the some theories. Some theories say these things it's so natural because in real life the students only get one hearing. That's for the university examination. For in the classroom, the teacher always use cassettes or audio, but if in this case the teacher played the audio or cassette twice, it's okay. And this process is also called as a process of normalization. What is the process of normalization? Is the students have a process in their mind to adjustable themselves in hearing voice. Hearing voice consists with they must adjustable with the pitch, the speed of the sound, and the quality of the sounds, something like that, and so forth. I think that's all the whole explanation of the intensive or extensive distinctions. In Indonesia, maksudnya itu adalah dia itu di sini itu maksudnya student itu mengalami proses bukan proses pernormalan tapi proses penyesuaian dalam mendengarkan, keterampilan mendengarkan. Jadi mereka akan terbiasa mendengarkan sesuatu the foreign language obviously start from pitch itu nada, dari quality-nya juga, dan kecepatan dalam berbicara seperti itu. Jadi itu pengertian dalam the intensive or extensive distinction. Dan untuk yang kedua ada preset questions. Preset questions it's more like the teacher provide the students with the audio but unclear passage, unclear question. And that's also called, because in some article that I found, the teacher or some theorists say we recognize that learners listen in an unfocused way if questions are not set until after the passage has been heard. Jadi maksudnya itu dia tuh student itu bakal ngedengerin secara nggak fokus gitu loh, secara nggak, jadi kayak cuma mendengarkan tapi hanya untuk kesenangan saja. Jadi listen for entertaining, jadi dia nggak mendengarkan secara fokus apa yang what is the audio are talking about. Jadi mereka nggak mendengarkan dan fokus sampai the passage or the question it's appear. Jadi contoh for example is if the theme about the seminar of reading comprehension, they talking about the reading comprehension from the start, definition, obstacles, similarities, differences, and something like that. But the question is only say about what is the similarities. So they only focus on the similarities. They will not focus on the any other topic, any other material of the reading comprehension. So that's the explanation of the preset questions in the first preset questions. Jadi maksudnya di Indonesia itu students itu nggak bakal fokus gitu, nggak bakal fokus mendengarkan seluruh gitu loh, seluruh audio. Jadi dia mendengarkan hanya yang ditanyakan saja kayak gitu, seperti itu. Jadi dengan by presenting comprehension question, we can ensure that learner listen with a clear purpose and that their answer are not dependent on the memory. Ya, benar. Kenapa begitu? Karena dengan menyajikan by providing this by providing them with this, jadi mereka itu mendengarkan itu dengan kita menyajikan tes seperti ini. By providing them with this kind of test, they will start to listen with a clear purpose. Jadi for example, like I already mentioned before about the reading comprehension, the theme of the reading comprehension, they will start listen with a clear purpose. What is the reading comprehension? Reading comprehension is talking about this, the purpose is this, not dependent on the memory. So not dependent on the memory, it means like the memory you just memorize about the question, about the first question is talking about this, so we only focus on this part. So in any other of the material of reading comprehension, they will not hear focusedly, so they will just pass the material. Now I will mention about the preset question, the other of the preset questions about in listenings. For the preset questions, this part is going around the task can get involved using text, not it's different from the other preset questions. More effective than traditional comprehension questions is the current practice of providing a task where learners do something with the information they have extracted from the text. Tasks can involve labeling IG buildings on a map, selecting IGs, choosing a film from 3 trailers, drawing IG symbols on a weather map, form filling, e.g. a hotel registration form, and completing a grid. Activities of this kind model the type of response that might be given to a listening experience in real life. They also provide a more reliable way of checking how much a learner has understood without involving other skills. For example, if learners give a wrong answer to a written comprehension question, it may be because they have not understand the question reading or because they cannot formulate an answer in writing rather than because their listening is at fault. The advantage of listening tasks is they can keep extraneous reading or writing to a minimum. A third benefit is that tasks demand individual response. Filling in the form, labeling diagrams, or making choice obligates every learner to try and make something of what he or she hears. This is especially effective if the class is asked to work in pairs. Jadi di Indonesia itu maksudnya dalam bahasa Indonesia, saya jelaskan dalam bahasa Indonesia dulu, habis itu baru di bahasa Inggris. Maksudnya itu dalam preset questions yang di sini itu tugasnya itu berbentuk seperti reading and writing. Jadi berbentuk dalam handout. Jadi question murid itu mendengarkan, jadi dia mengisi seperti contohnya filling the gaps, jadi dia mengisi sesuatu yang kosong di dalam suatu conversation atau songs maybe. Seperti itu juga dia bisa menggambar simbol apa yang diomongkan itu, misal seperti dia mention tentang head earphone, jadi kita menggambar tentang earphone. Begitu juga bisa digunakan mind mapping seperti itu. Dan aktivitas yang seperti ini itu, model yang seperti ini itu lebih reliable, lebih cocok dalam mengecek pengetahuan mereka, mengecek sejauh mana pemahaman mereka dalam dunia nyata di teaching listening itu. Masalah terbesar dalam hal ini itu adalah mereka itu tidak bisa menggunakan ini itu teaching listening ini tuh listening aja gitu. Tapi mereka karena tas ini menggunakan handout, jadi mereka tuh lebih menggunakan reading mereka dalam membaca soal, terus menjawab mereka dalam writing menggunakan tes tulisan. Tapi sebenarnya itu kalau mereka melakukan kesalahan itu semua berasal dari listening mereka yang bermasalah. Dan keuntungan dalam teaching listening ini, dalam proses pembelajaran listening ini, untuk menjaga students dari reading and writing. Jadi mereka cuma fokus dalam hanya mendengarkan saja. Seperti itu. Yang manfaat lainnya dalam teaching listening ini adalah meminta students untuk merespon sesuatu individual. Jadi mereka tuh maksudnya individual di sini. Jadi dari tas-tas yang saya mention tadi, seperti filling the gaps, drawing a symbol, and the completing a grid, hotel registration form, seperti itu membutuhkan respon yang individual. Jadi mereka tuh harus menjawab sendiri gitu, individual aja seperti itu. Dan cara ini tuh sangat efektif dalam bekerja secara berkelompok gitu. So this task is very effective in work in pairs. So basically, in other words in English, the task in this preset question is only task based on the using handout, and the student will answer the question with using their reading and speaking, reading and writing mostly, and is actually they use your listening skill. If they make something wrong in answer the questions, that's not fall in their reading or writing skill. It's all from their listening skills. And major difficulty of this problem is they cannot establish about the reading skill, writing skill, and listening skill. And the advantage of this problem is the teacher can keep their student from reading too much and writing too much, so they only focus on listening and listening. So I think that's all for me. So we move to the post listening activity. That's all the explanation of the listening part of the teaching listening. So we move to the last part of the teaching listening, which is the post listening activities. Now we come to the post listening activities, which is the in Indonesia adalah aktivitas pasca mendengarkan. Jadi maksudnya di sini, as I mentioned before, as I explained before as in the intro, this part only consists with the analysis of the grammar and the listen and repeat about the vocabulary that they have in the listening context. So I will start read first, and then I give you explanation of the bottom line that I got from some article that I read. So we no longer spend time examining the grammar of the listening text that reflect a typically structuralism view of listening as a means of reinforcing recently learned material. For example, Susan threatened John. Do you remember the word she used? Listening texts often provide excellent example of functions such as apologizing, inviting, refusing, suggesting, and so forth. Jadi, in this post-listening activities, we are no longer to analysis the grammar, the structuralism of the grammar itself. For example, do you like this pizza? Maybe do you like this pizza? We don't know about the tense they use, or we don't have time. We know about the tenses, but we don't have time to analyze that. So that's the point, the first point. The second point is this listening task can be useful to get the many expression, but we don't have enough time to analyzing the grammar, which is, even though I already mentioned about the analysis grammar in the earlier, but now it's we analyze the grammar, but we don't have time. We are no longer, as this article say, we no longer spend time examining the grammar of the listening text. So, but that's the disadvantage. For the advantage is listening text can be used to find many expressions, such as can be used for many many expression such as apologizing and inviting, refusing, suggesting, and so forth. There's so many more expression that we can find in listening. Maybe for example, if one speaker say something like this: what do you broke my glasses, what do you have to say with yourself? I'm sorry, I do beg my apologize, my humblest apologies, and many more. So that's the basic simple example of the post listening activities for the second point. And the third point is, as part of post listening, one can ask learners to infer the meaning of new words from the context in which they appear, just as they do in reading. The procedure is to write the target words on the board, replay the sentence containing them, and ask learners to work out their meanings. Some teachers are deterred from employing this vocabulary inferring exercise by the difficulty of finding the right places on the cassettes. So this point is quite simple, just because this only just provide the student with the handout which fill the questions. Maybe just the student only filling the gaps, filling the blank point, and the student and the teacher play the cassettes not just once but twice, only be like that. And yeah, that's why I call that listen and repeat method in teaching listening. So I think already explained all of the teaching listening, from the pre-listening activities, listening activities, and the post-listening activities, about the preset question, about the intensive or extensive distinctions, and uh, the overview of the all three teaching listening, and also for the analysis and grammar in teaching listening, and also for what is the listen and repeat method in teaching listening. I hope you guys all understand about this. Okay, I think that's all from me. That's all the explanation that I can explain. For the last word, I put Om Santi 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 Om. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Guys, my name is Agustya. So today I want to present about raising students' awareness of the features of real-world listening input. The first, the use of time creating device. To ease the production of speech, the speaker normally stream creating device that are used to gain time for the speaker so that he can formulate what to say next in spontaneous speech. One typical example of this device is the use of pause fillers. This belong to one of the 5 types of speech marker identified by Olinak. Necessary event influence speech. Olinak agreed that the occurrence of speech marker, such as pause fillers at the end of a completed speech unit or transitionally relevant place. Example at grammatical juncture is very frequent despite the lack of synthetic or lexical function that pause fillers such as er, or serve. They do have primary aim to help the speaker solicit more time to plan, in turn to furnish the listener with more processing time. The second, the use of the facilitation device to pressure of time in real life communication also renders the necessary for the speaker to use facilitation device to ease speech production. Effective listener need to identify and be familiar with this device in free speech. The use of less complex structure is one that this device in spoken language learners have to know that is the uncommon to find fragments and utterance which are reduction of complete underlying or understood construction. Many construction are less than complete clauses. Ellipses are very common because they help the speaker to catch story any unnecessary. Common examples are yes, I did, me too, so am I, and so on. If learners are not prepared for this listening and file the recover meaning of this construction, they will encounter problem in real life communication. This problem is particularly prevalent among Hong Kong. The use of compensation device. Unlike the written text, spoken discourse cannot be retrieved during normal instruction. The speed of natural speech and the fact that one cannot ask the speaker to repeat more than once means that listening input has to be processed very quickly. Fortunately, redundancy in natural speech does allow the listener some processing time. The 3 typical ways to build and redundancy and help relieve memory, load and repetition, formulation and rephrasing. Speakers always find themselves correcting or improving what they have already said. They may repeat part of the speech at request of the listener or express their ideas in different way. This kind of redundancy is necessary to help understanding on the part of listener. Effective listener therefore identify these elements of redundancy density, and are able to guess meanings from the help and compensation device. Logical implication: if time creating facilitation and compensation device are necessary evils, the eval learners has to recognize their location and function in running speech. The learner needs to understand that these devices are there to facilitate the speaker's production and the listener's processing of speech and not to distract the listener's attention or to impede understanding. ESL students who are so used to reading the written form of the language need to be alert to this so that they will not expect to hear uninterrupted, perfect flow of speech. Knowing what to expect is necessary if they are to be effective listener. To sum up, spoken language is not written language spoken aloud. Learners need to be aware of the use of the STEAM creating, facilitation, and compensation device, which are virtually non-existent in any text to which students are conventionally accustomed. In fact, many listening material available in market for foreign learners in English are so heavily edited that many of the features of real speech are missing. No wonder learners find it hard to understand united speech or real-life interaction. Therefore, I would reiterate that students should be given opportunities to be exposed to real-life listening input. 5. Classroom implementation awareness raising exercise. I shall now describe how the implication of these features in the overall speech can be put into classroom practice. The first step toward developing learners' listening skill is to raise their awareness of the difference between written and spoken language. Take the following as an example. Spoken text: somebody told me you once did some busking. Is that right? Is that right? Oh, yeah, yes. It means is that I went busking what just after university or was it while was at university? But anyway, in summer once in Hong Kong. Writing text: I went basking once in Hong Kong during the summer's holidays. However, I am not sure whether it was while I was still at university or after I had just left. And the last, skills enabling exercise. After the conscious raising exercise, the teacher can provide learners with opportunities to identify team saving, facilitation, and compensation device in running speech. The study material produced for students are often artificial in order to suit the level of the student. Typically, such material do not have hesitation, repetition, very loose organization, and incomplete sentence. To make sure that the listening input is authentic and comprehensible, pick at the right level of student, the teacher can help students produce their own listening material. Not only would this help students comprehend that listening input, but would also integrate both listening speaking skill practice.